The New Mexico wind howled across the barren landscape like a wounded animal carrying sand and memories in equal measure. Sarah Harlow sealed the last crack in her cabin window with strips of old cloth, her movements practiced after 3 years of desert living. She winced as another contraction gripped her body more intense than the last. The baby was coming, and the storm was only getting worse. At 33, Sarah wasn't young for childbearing, but she'd done this before. 3 times, in fact. Though this time there was no midwife, no husband pacing outside the bedroom door, no excited siblings waiting to meet the new arrival. Just Sarah alone in a cabin at the edge of nowhere, with a storm that threatened to tear the roof from over her head. She braced herself against the table as another wave of pain washed over her. 9 months she'd carried this child, talking to it through lonely nights, promising things she wasn't sure she could deliver. A future, safety, love. "Just you and me, little one," she whispered, stroking her swollen belly. "We'll get through this together." She prepared as best she could. Clean linens, boiled water cooling in the kettle, the knife she'd sterilized in the fire, all waiting for the moment when her body would finally release this new life into the world. A life she hadn't planned for, hadn't expected, but had chosen to carry nonetheless. As the contraction eased, Sarah moved to check the back door, making sure it was securely latched against the storm. That's when she heard a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the creaking timbers of her small home. A low, hungry growl. Sarah froze, one hand instinctively moving to her belly, the other reaching for the rifle she kept loaded by the door. Through the small window, she could make out a gray shape moving through the swirling dust. A wolf, gaunt and desperate, driven down from the hills by hunger. Another contraction, hit nearly buckling her knees. The wolf sensed weakness, circling closer to the cabin. Sarah could see its ribs through its mangy coat, its eyes reflecting amber in a flash of lightning. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she raised the rifle to her shoulder, steadying her breathing the way Nathaniel had taught her years ago. "Exhale as you squeeze," he'd said. "The bullet flies true when your body is emptying, not filling." The wolf stopped sensing the threat, but hunger made it bold. It took another step toward the cabin. Sarah fired. The sound cracked through the howling storm, and the wolf dropped without a sound. For a moment, Sarah stood in the doorway, the rifle still smoking in her hands, her body caught between creating life and dealing death. Then the strongest contraction yet doubled her over, and she knew it was time. She barely made it to the bed, the rifle clattering to the floor beside her. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and determination as the storm raged outside, as if the heavens themselves were laboring alongside her. Sarah bit down on a folded piece of leather, refusing to scream into the empty cabin. There was no one to hear her anyway. Just before dawn, as the storm finally began to subside, her daughter was born. Tiny and blue cord wrapped around her neck. Sarah worked frantically, fingers trembling, as she unwound the cord, cleared the tiny mouth, breathed into lungs that refused to fill on their own. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, little one, don't leave me too." But the baby girl never took a breath of her own, never cried, never opened her eyes to see the mother who had carried her through grief and solitude. Sarah held her daughter until the tiny body grew cold, whispering apologies and lullabies as the first light of dawn filtered through the dusty windows. She named her Faith because that's what the pregnancy had given her these past months, a reason to continue to build to live. Now that Faith lay still in her arms. When the sun rose fully, Sarah wrapped her daughter in a soft blanket she'd spent months embroidering with tiny flowers. She carried the small bundle outside to the grove behind the cabin, where 4 wooden crosses already stood, markers for the family she'd lost to fever 3 years before. Nathaniel, her husband of 12 years. William, her firstborn, just 7 when death took him. Anna and Joshua, barely 4. The ground was still damp from the storm, easier to dig than the usual sun-baked earth. Sarah worked methodically, the shovel biting into soil, her tears falling silently. Her body ached from childbirth, but she refused to rest until the grave was finished. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered as she laid the tiny bundle in the earth. "I'm sorry you never got to see the wildflowers bloom or hear the coyotes sing at night." Her voice caught. "I'm sorry you never got to meet your father." She paused, hand resting on the small mound of fresh earth. That wasn't quite true. This child had no father. Not really. Just a faceless man who'd taken what wasn't offered during a raid on the supply wagon Sarah had been traveling with 2 years ago. She'd killed him afterward, her first time taking a human life. She didn't regret it. When she discovered the pregnancy months later, her first instinct had been despair. But something stopped her from ending it. Perhaps the same stubborn will that had kept her alive after losing Nathaniel and the children. The refusal to let others determine what she could bear, what she could build from ashes. So she'd chosen to carry the child, to love it, despite its origins. A choice that was hers alone, perhaps the only choice left to her in a world that had taken everything else. She fashioned a small cross from 2 pieces of smooth wood carving, Faith Harlow, with the date. The 5th cross in a row. Too many crosses for one woman to tend. Sarah stood there until the sun was high overhead, her shadows short and dark against the ground. Then she turned and walked back to the empty cabin, shoulders straight, despite the hollow ache in her chest. She would allow herself one day to mourn. One day to be nothing but a mother who had lost a child. Tomorrow she would be a survivor again. 2 weeks passed. Sarah moved through her days like a ghost, doing what needed to be done to keep living. Tending the small garden that provided her meager vegetables. Checking her traps for rabbits. Mending clothes that hardly seemed worth the effort. Her body slowly healed from the birth, but the emptiness remained. She spoke aloud, sometimes a habit formed during long months of solitude. To Nathaniel, to the children, to Faith. It wasn't madness, she told herself, just a refusal to let silence win. On the 15th day, as she was hanging laundry to dry in the harsh sun, Sarah noticed smoke rising in the eastern sky. Too much smoke for a cooking fire, too dark for burning brush. Someone's home was burning. She watched it for a long moment, debating whether to ignore it. Other people's troubles weren't her concern anymore. She'd learned that lesson the hard way when she'd tried to help a family with sick children 2 settlements over. By the time she returned home, raiders had broken into her own cabin, taken what little food she had stored. But the smoke continued to rise, black and ominous, against the clear blue sky. With a sigh, Sarah went inside and strapped on her holster, checking that her revolver was loaded. She saddled her mare Willow and packed a small bag with medical supplies, old habits from her nursing days during the war. Before leaving, she surveyed her cabin one last time, wondering if it would still be standing when she returned. It took her nearly 2 hours to reach the source of the smoke. She approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the rocks and scrub brush that dotted the landscape. The smell hit her first, burning wood-scorched fabric, and something else. Something worse. Cresting a small rise, Sarah finally saw it. A modest homestead, the main house still smoldering, black smoke curling from the collapsed roof. The barn was completely destroyed, nothing but charred timbers. Nearby, a small herd of cattle lay slaughtered, their bodies already drawing vultures. And there, along the fence line that bordered the property, 3 figures were tied spread-eagle to the wooden posts. A man and 2 boys. Sarah's first instinct was to turn back. This wasn't just bad luck or an accident. This was deliberate cruelty, the kind that might return to finish what it had started. But as she watched, she saw the man's chest rise and fall weakly. He was alive. So might be the children. Cursing under her breath, Sarah urged Willow forward, approaching the fence line with her hand on her revolver. As she drew closer, she could see the extent of the damage. The man had been severely beaten, his face swollen and bloody, one shoulder clearly dislocated. The boys, one about 10 and the other perhaps 7, were sunburned and dehydrated, their lips cracked and bleeding. "Mister," Sarah called softly, dismounting. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered, but he didn't respond. The older boy turned his head, slightly, eyes widening at the sight of her. He tried to speak, but his voice was a dry rasp. "Water," Sarah understood, reaching for her canteen. She held it to the boy's lips, letting him take small sips. "Easy now, too much will make you sick." "Please," the boy managed. "Help Papa." Sarah nodded, moving to the man. Up close, she could see he was probably in his early 40s, with dark hair streaked with premature gray. His wrists were raw and bleeding where the ropes had cut into them. "Sir, I'm going to cut you down," she said, taking out her knife. "It's going to hurt when your arms come free. Brace yourself." He gave no indication that he'd hurt her, but as she sawed through the first rope and his arm fell limply to his side, a groan escaped his split lips. Sarah worked quickly, freeing his other arm and then his feet. The man collapsed into her arms, heavier than she expected, nearly pulling her down with him. "Can you stand?" she asked, struggling to support his weight. "I need to get the boys." He mumbled something incoherent, his head lolling against her shoulder. Sarah lowered him gently to the ground and moved to free the boys. The younger one had passed out, his small body dangling from the ropes. The older boy watched her with weary, pain-filled eyes. "What's your name?" she asked as she cut through his bindings. "Oliver," he whispered. "That's Ethan, my brother." He swallowed painfully. "And my father, Noah Reed." "I'm Sarah Harlow." She caught him as he fell forward, his legs too weak to support him. "How long have you been tied here?" "Since yesterday morning. They came at dawn." Sarah's jaw tightened. More than a day in the brutal sun without water. It was a miracle they were alive at all. With both boys free, she faced a dilemma. There was no way she could get all three of them onto her horse at once, and she couldn't leave any of them here. Not with whoever had done this potentially returning. "Oliver, I'm going to take your brother first," she decided. "He's in the worst shape. I'll come back for you and your father." The boy shook his head weakly. "Don't leave Papa. They might come back." Sarah looked from the unconscious child to the barely breathing man. "I can't carry your father alone, and Willow can't take all of us." "Then take Papa first," Oliver insisted. "I'll watch Ethan." Sarah studied the boy's face, seeing a determination there that belied his years. "I'll be as quick as I can," she promised. "There's water in my saddlebag. Small sips only, you understand." Oliver nodded, and Sarah turned her attention to Noah Reed. It took all her strength to haul him over Willow's back in a fireman's carry. The horse snorted in protest but held steady. "I'll be back," Sarah told Oliver, squeezing his shoulder gently. "Stay in the shade if you can." The ride back to her cabin was slow and grueling. Noah never fully regained consciousness, though he groaned whenever they hit rough terrain. By the time Sarah reached her home, her back and shoulders screamed from the effort of keeping him balanced across the saddle. Getting him inside was another ordeal, but she managed to half-drag, half-carry him to her bed. She worked quickly, cleaning his wounds with boiled water and whiskey, setting his dislocated shoulder, with a practiced motion that brought back memories of battlefield medicine. His ribs were badly bruised, possibly broken, and a deep gash on his forehead needed stitches. As she worked, she talked to him more for her own comfort than his. "You're lucky I saw that smoke, mister. Another day out there and the vultures would have had more than your cattle to feast on." His only response was a flutter of eyelids and an occasional twitch of pain. When she'd done all she could for him, Sarah left a cup of water within reach and hurried back for the boys. The sun was already beginning its descent, and she didn't want Oliver and Ethan spending another night in the open. She found them where she'd left them, Oliver holding his brother upright, both huddled in the meager shade of a fence post. Ethan was conscious now, though barely, his eyes unfocused. "Your father's safe at my place," Sarah told them as she dismounted. "Let's get you there too." She took Ethan first, cradling him in front of her on the saddle. The boy was light, too light for his age, and burning with fever. Oliver walked alongside, one hand clutching Willow's stirrup as if afraid they might leave him behind. "How far away do you live?" he asked, his voice a little stronger after the water. "About 2 hours' ride," Sarah answered. "But we'll go slower with you walking. There's a stream about halfway where we can rest." "Are you a doctor?" Sarah smiled faintly. "No, I was a nurse during the war. Saw enough broken bodies to know a thing or two about patching them up." "The war's been over for 13 years, Oliver said, eyeing her skeptically. "Some lessons stick with you," she replied. They reached the stream as twilight deepened into night. Sarah helped Ethan drink while Oliver splashed his face with cool water. "What happened at your farm?" she asked quietly. "Who did this to you?" Oliver's face darkened. "Men came, 8 or 9 of them. Said Papa owed money to someone named Reed. When he said he didn't, they started breaking things." He swallowed hard. "Then they started hitting him. When I tried to help, they grabbed me and Ethan, made us watch while they beat him more." Sarah nodded, not pressing for details. She'd seen enough of the world to know its cruelties. "And then they burned everything. Said it was a message that debts always get paid one way or another." Oliver looked up at her, his young face hardened by what he'd witnessed. "But Papa doesn't owe anybody money. We keep to ourselves." "Some men don't need a real reason to be cruel," Sarah said, helping Ethan back onto the horse. "They just need an excuse." The rest of the journey passed in silence. By the time they reached Sarah's cabin, both boys were exhausted, barely able to stand. She settled Ethan in the small second bedroom, where her own children had once slept, and made a pallet for Oliver near his father. Will he be okay? Oliver asked, looking at Noah's still form. He's strong, Sarah said, though she wasn't at all certain. The next day or two will tell us. Now get some sleep. You're safe here. After the boys were settled, Sarah sat at her small table, a cup of cold coffee in her hands. What had she done brought three strangers into her home? People who had powerful enemies, people who might bring those enemies to her doorstep. But as she glanced at the sleeping figures, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. They were alive because of her. That had to count for something, in a world that seemed determined to take rather than give. She sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. It had been a long time since she'd had anyone to care for besides herself. A long time since she'd heard voices other than her own within these walls. "What am I doing, Nathaniel?" she whispered to the empty chair across from her, a habit she couldn't break. "Inviting trouble right to our door." There was no answer, of course. There never was. But saying the words aloud made her feel less alone with her decision. Sarah checked on her patience once more before settling into the rocking chair by the fire rifle across her lap, just in case trouble came looking for them in the night. Noah Reed woke to unfamiliar surroundings and the worst pain he'd experienced since the war. Every breath sent daggers through his ribs, and his shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. For a moment, panic seized him as disjointed memories flashed through his mind: men on horseback, his son screaming, the smell of smoke and blood. "Oliver, Ethan, they're safe," came a woman's voice, firm but gentle. "Try not to move. Your ribs are likely broken." Noah turned his head to see a woman sitting beside the bed, her auburn hair streaked with gray, her face weathered by sun and hardship. She looked to be in her 30s, though her eyes held the weariness of someone much older. "Where am I?" "My home," she replied, helping him take a sip of water. "About 2 hours' ride east of what's left of your farm." "Sarah Harlow," he said, remembering the name Oliver had mentioned during brief moments of consciousness. "That's right, your boys are sleeping. The younger one, Ethan, has a fever, but he's resting. Oliver is right over there." She nodded to a pallet on the floor where Oliver slept, curled on his side, one hand tucked under his cheek like a much younger child. Relief washed over Noah, momentarily eclipsing the pain. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for saving them, for saving us." Sarah's expression remained impassive. "You were lucky I saw the smoke. What happened?" Noah closed his eyes briefly, the memories rushing back. "Riders came at dawn, said I owed money to someone named Reed. When I told them they had the wrong man, He swallowed hard. "They started destroying everything. Shot my cattle, beat me in front of my sons. Then they tied us to the fence and left us to die in the sun." "Did you recognize any of them?" "No, we've only been in this territory for a few months. Came from Missouri after—" He trailed off, then simply said, "After we lost their mother." Sarah nodded, not pressing for details. "You should rest. We can talk more when you are stronger." As she stood to leave, Noah caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man so injured. "Why did you help us?" Sarah looked down at his hand, then at his face. Her eyes were a clear gray, like the sky before a storm. "I know what it's like to be left to die alone," she said quietly. "No one came for us." Before he could ask what she meant, she gently pulled her wrist free and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain and fever dreams for Noah. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find Oliver sitting beside him, sometimes Sarah changing his bandages with gentle, efficient hands. He called out names in his delirium: Rebecca, Joseph, sometimes just brother, with a note of desperation that made Sarah wonder. Ethan's fever broke on the second day, much to everyone's relief. He was weak but alert, his appetite returning gradually. Sarah found herself watching the boy as he slowly explored her small cabin, touching objects with careful fingers, studying the few books she owned with curious eyes. "Was this your husband?" he asked on the third day, pointing to a faded daguerreotype of a tall man with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Yes," Sarah replied, taking the image and running her thumb over the tarnished frame. "His name was Nathaniel. He was a school teacher before the war." "Where is he now?" Sarah's eyes drifted to the window toward the 5 crosses visible in the distance. "He died 3 years ago. He and our children got sick with fever." Ethan's eyes widened. "All of them?" "All of them," Sarah confirmed, her voice steady though her heart ached at the words. "William was 7 like you. Anna and Joshua were 4. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and with the simple, direct empathy of a child. That's very sad. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had a delicate face with a spray of freckles across his nose and eyes that seemed older than his years. Yes, she agreed, it is. That evening, as Sarah was preparing a simple stew with the rabbit she'd caught that morning, Noah finally emerged from the bedroom. He moved gingerly, one arm held close to his injured ribs, but his eyes were clear for the first time since she'd found him. You shouldn't be up, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, he replied, easing himself onto a chair at the small table. I needed to thank you properly. Sarah shrugged, returning to her cooking. You've already done that. Not adequately. He watched her for a moment, then asked, how did you find us? I saw the smoke from your farm, went to investigate. Alone, that was dangerous. A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. I've been alone for 3 years, Mr. Reed. Danger and I are well acquainted. Noah nodded, understanding in his eyes. Your family. Fever took them. All within a week of each other. She stirred the stew with more force than necessary. I'm the only one it spared. I'm sorry, Noah said softly. I know something of that loss. My wife Rebecca died 2 years ago. Sarah didn't respond, but she felt a flicker of connection. Here was someone else who knew the particular ache of an empty house of memories that ambushed you in quiet moments. Papa, Ethan's voice broke the silence as he rushed into the room, throwing himself carefully against his father's good side. You're better. Noah winced but wrapped his arm around his son, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. Getting there, buddy, thanks to Miss Harlow. Oliver appeared in the doorway, relief evident on his face despite his attempt to appear grown-up and reserved. You should be resting, Papa. I've rested enough, Noah replied, holding out his arm. Oliver hesitated only a moment before crossing the room to join the embrace. Sarah turned away from the scene, a knot forming in her throat. It had been a long time since she'd witnessed such tenderness, a long time since these walls had heard a child's voice raised in happiness rather than fever dreams. We'll leave as soon as I'm able, Noah said, addressing her back. I don't want to burden you any longer than necessary. Sarah faced them, her expression neutral. And go where your farm is ashes, Mr. Reed. And whoever did this might still be looking for you. I'll figure something out. Perhaps head back east. With what money on what horses? Noah had no answer for that. You're welcome to stay until you're healed and have a plan, Sarah said. This place is remote enough that you should be safe for a while. Noah studied her face, searching for something, pity, perhaps, or reluctance behind her offer. He found neither, just a straightforward practicality that he found oddly comforting. Thank you, he said finally. We won't impose longer than necessary. Sarah nodded, returning to her cooking. Keeper will be ready soon. Oliver, would you set the table 4 plates? It was the first time in 3 years she'd needed more than one. That night, as the house settled into silence, Sarah slipped outside to stand beneath the stars. The desert air was cool against her skin, a welcome relief after the warmth of the cabin. She'd forgotten how much heat human bodies generated, how close 4 people could make a small space feel. She walked to the small grove where her family lay buried, the freshest mound of earth still visible in the moonlight. Standing before the crosses, Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest, the hollow space that never seemed to fill, no matter how much time passed. They seem like good people, she said softly, addressing the crosses as if her family could hear. The father, Noah, he's lost someone too. You can see it in his eyes, that same emptiness. She knelt beside the smallest grave, running her fingers over the rough wood of the cross. I miss you, Faith. I miss all of you. She took a deep breath. The house feels different with them there. Less haunted. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. A sound behind her made Sarah turn sharply, hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. Noah stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning heavily on a walking stick she recognized from beside her door. I'm sorry, he said quickly, raising his free hand. I didn't mean to intrude. I couldn't sleep and saw you leave the house. Sarah relaxed slightly but remained kneeling, as if protecting the small graves from his gaze. It's fine. I just come out here sometimes to talk to them. Noah nodded, not moving closer. I understand. I used to do the same at Rebecca's grave. He hesitated, then added, The youngest one, was it recent? Sarah looked back at Faith's cross, the wood still fresh and unmarked by weather. 2 weeks ago, she was stillborn. I'm so sorry, Noah said, and there was genuine pain in his voice. I didn't realize you were expecting when you found us. You shouldn't have been carrying me in your condition. A bitter smile crossed Sarah's face. I wasn't in that condition anymore. Understanding dawned in Noah's eyes, followed by deep compassion. And still you helped us. Carried 3 strangers to safety when you should have been resting healing. Sarah stood brushing dirt from her skirt. There was no one else to do it. Nevertheless, I am in your debt, a debt I fear I can never adequately repay. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. In the moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows, but she could see the man beneath the injuries, a strong face lined by grief and hardship, but with kindness in the set of his mouth. There are no debts between survivors, Mr. Reed, she said finally. Only shared burdens. He nodded, accepting her words. After a moment, he said, I saw you watching the farm, from the ridge to the west a few days before the attack. Sarah stiffened. You're mistaken. I don't think so. I've always had good eyes even at a distance. You were there 3 times that I noticed. She didn't deny it again, just looked away toward the distant mountains, silver-tipped in the moonlight. I like to know who my neighbors are when new people settle nearby. Understandable, Noah replied, his tone careful, though 2 hours' ride is quite a distance to check on neighbors. The desert makes its own rules about distance and time, Mr. Reed. 2 hours can be the difference between life and death out here. As if to punctuate her words, a coyote howled in the distance, the sound echoing across the empty landscape. Noah shivered slightly, either from the cooling night air or the eerie cry. Sarah couldn't tell. You should go back inside, she said. The nights get cold and your body needs warmth to heal. Noah nodded but didn't move immediately. The men who attacked us, he said, his voice low and strained. They mentioned a name. Elijah Reed. Does that mean anything to you? Sarah's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. No, she said after a moment. The name means nothing to me. Noah studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Of course. Good night, Miss Harlow. Thank you again for your kindness. As he made his way back to the cabin, leaning heavily on the walking stick, Sarah remained among the crosses, her expression troubled. Once Noah was out of sight, she knelt again beside the smallest grave. I'm sorry I lied, she whispered. But some truths are too dangerous, even for a man who's already survived so much. She stayed there a while longer, silent, now letting the desert night wrap around her like a familiar blanket. When she finally returned to the cabin, Noah was nowhere to be seen, but a small notebook lay open on the table, a pencil beside it. Sarah hesitated, then moved closer, drawn by curiosity. The page showed a skilled sketch of a man's face so like Noah's that they could have been twins. Beneath it, a single word was written in careful script, Joseph. Sarah stared at the drawing for a long moment, pieces fitting together in her mind. Then she quietly closed the notebook and returned it exactly as she'd found it, carrying this new knowledge like a stone in her pocket, heavy but hidden from view. Days stretched into weeks as Noah slowly regained his strength. The boys adapted to life at Sarah's homestead with the resilience of youth, helping with chores and exploring the surrounding area, though never out of sight of the cabin at Sarah's insistence. Oliver proved to be a thoughtful, capable boy who took his responsibilities seriously. He fetched water, gathered eggs from Sarah's few chickens, and kept an eye on his younger brother with a vigilance that spoke of past traumas. Ethan was more openly curious, asking Sarah endless questions about her books, her garden, the war. His innocent inquiries sometimes caught her off guard, breaching defenses she'd built over years of solitude. Did you ever shoot anyone during the war? He asked one afternoon as he helped her shell peas on the porch. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. Yes, she said finally, when I had to. Papa says killing is a sin. Your father is a wise man, Sarah replied carefully, but sometimes in war people do things they would never do otherwise. Have you killed anyone who wasn't a soldier? The question hit too close to the truth, and Sarah found herself looking toward the graves, toward Faith's resting place. That's enough questions for today, Ethan. Go help Oliver with the firewood. As the boy scampered off, Sarah became aware of Noah watching from the doorway, his expression troubled. I apologize for his questions, he said. Children don't always understand boundaries. It's all right, Sarah said, returning to her task. He's curious. That's natural. Noah joined her on the porch, moving more easily now, though still with a careful awareness of his healing ribs. Nevertheless, some topics aren't appropriate. I'll speak with him. Sarah shrugged. He's seen his home burned and his father beaten. I think the boundaries of appropriate have already been crossed for him. Noah was quiet for a moment, watching his son stack wood beside the cabin. You're right, of course. I just want to protect what innocence they have left. A noble goal, Sarah said, her tone softening, but perhaps an impossible one in this world. Perhaps. Noah turned to look at her directly. I wanted to discuss our situation. I'm well enough to travel now, and I've been thinking about our next steps. Sarah kept her eyes on her work, ignoring the unexpected pang at the thought of them leaving. And what have you decided? I'd like to rebuild. Not at the old place, that would be foolish, but somewhere nearby, start over. With what resources? Sarah asked practically. Building takes money supplies. I have some savings, Noah admitted. Not much, but enough to start. And I was a carpenter before, he hesitated, before I became a minister. I know how to build. Sarah looked up at that surprise evident in her expression. A minister? You never mentioned that. A shadow crossed Noah's face. I don't mention it often anymore. It's complicated. Most things worth talking about are, Sarah observed. Noah smiled faintly. Indeed. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to let us stay a bit longer while I scout locations and begin gathering materials. I'd compensate you, of course. There's no need for that, Sarah said quickly. You're welcome to stay as long as necessary. She paused, searching for the right words. It's been good having people in the house again. Nisha, the admission cost her something. She could feel it, a piece of the armor she'd built around herself. But it was true. Despite her initial reservations, she'd grown accustomed to the sounds of the boys playing, to Noah's deep voice reading to them in the evenings, to the simple rituals of shared meals and divided chores. Thank you, Noah said, and she could hear the genuine gratitude in his voice. The boys have grown fond of you, you know, especially Ethan. He talks about you constantly. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that she quickly tried to suppress. Getting attached was dangerous. She knew better than most how quickly happiness could be snatched away. He's a good boy, she said neutrally. Both of them are. Noah seemed about to say more when Oliver called out, pointing to the horizon. Riders coming! Sarah was on her feet instantly, hand going to the revolver at her hip. Noah stood as well, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. Get the boys inside, Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. Now! Without question, Noah called his sons to him, ushering them through the door. Sarah remained on the porch, counting the approaching figures. 3 riders moving at a steady pace rather than a gallop. Not an immediate threat, perhaps, but caution had kept her alive this long. She stepped inside long enough to retrieve her rifle, then resumed her position on the porch, the weapon held ready, but not raised. As the riders drew closer, she could make out more details. 2 men and a woman, trail-worn and dusty. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting as they approached, pulling his horse to a stop, a respectful distance from the cabin. Afternoon, ma'am, he called. Didn't mean to alarm you. We're looking for water and a place to rest our horses if you can spare it. Sarah kept her rifle visible. Water's around back by the well. Help yourselves, then move on. The man nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her wariness. Much obliged. We've been riding since dawn. He gestured to his companions. My brother Caleb and his wife Sarah. I'm Matthew. Sarah nodded but didn't offer her own name. Well's that way, she repeated, pointing. There's a trough for the horses. As the riders dismounted and led their horses around the cabin, Noah appeared in the doorway behind her. Friends of yours? Never seen them before, Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the strangers. Could be innocent travelers. Could be scouts for Reed. Noah's face hardened at the name. I should go out there with you. No, stay with the boys. I can handle this. She followed the riders to the well, keeping a careful distance. The woman, Sarah, was younger than Sarah Harlow, at first thought probably in her early 20s. She had a pinched, tired face and kept close to the man identified as her husband. You folks headed somewhere specific? Sarah asked as they watered their horses. Matthew glanced at her, taking in the rifle she still carried. Santa Fe eventually. Got family there. You're off the main trail, Sarah observed. Had some trouble with bandits a few days back, Caleb explained. Thought it's safer to take the less traveled routes. Sarah's suspicion eased slightly, but she remained alert. There's a trading post about a day's ride south of here. You can resupply there. Matthew nodded his thanks. Any chance we could rest here for an hour or so? Sarah's not been well. Sarah studied the young woman, noting her pale complexion and the way she leaned against the well for support. An hour, she agreed reluctantly. No more. There's shade on the north side of the house. As the travelers settled in the indicated spot, Sarah returned to the porch, positioning herself where she could keep an eye on them while still watching the horizon. Noah joined her after a while, a cup of coffee in each hand. He offered one to Sarah, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. You think they're lying? He asked in a low voice. I think everyone's lying about something, Sarah replied. But no, they seem genuinely trail-worn. The woman looks ill. Noah took a sip of his coffee, wincing slightly at the bitterness. You've grown cautious living out here alone. I've grown alive living out here alone, Sarah corrected. Caution is why. They fell into a companionable silence, watching as the travelers rested in the shade, speaking quietly among themselves. After a while, the woman Sarah approached the porch hesitantly. Excuse me, ma'am, she said, her voice soft with a slight southern accent. I just wanted to thank you for letting us rest here. It's been a difficult journey. Sarah nodded, her expression neutral. You're welcome. Sarah twisted her hands nervously. I was wondering if you might have any willow bark for tea. I've been having terrible headaches and my supply ran out days ago. Sarah studied the young woman more carefully. Up close, she could see the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands. I have some, she said finally. Wait here. She returned a few minutes later with a small cloth bundle. Steep it for at least 10 minutes, she instructed, handing it to Sarah. No more than twice a day. Thank you, Sarah said, genuine relief in her voice. You're very kind. Sarah shook her head slightly. Just practical. No one benefits from suffering that can be eased. As Sarah returned to her companions, Noah gave Sarah a thoughtful look. For someone so determined to keep people at a distance, you have a remarkably soft heart. Sarah snorted. Don't mistake practicality for softness, Mr. Reed. The girl's ill. No point in making it worse. Before Noah could respond, a shout from the travelers drew their attention. Matthew was on his feet, pointing to the horizon where a cloud of dust indicated approaching riders. Many more than 3. Friends of yours? Noah asked tensely. Sarah's face had gone hard as stone. Get inside, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Get the boys to the root cellar. Now. She didn't wait to see if he complied, already moving toward the travelers with quick, purposeful strides. How many were following you? She demanded. Matthew's face had paled. 6, maybe 7. We thought we'd lost them yesterday. Well, you didn't, Sarah snapped, and now they've found my home. She turned to look at the approaching dust cloud, calculating quickly. Get your horses behind the house out of sight. Then all of you into the cellar with my people, quickly. As the travelers scrambled to comply, Sarah hurried to the cabin, retrieving extra ammunition and her second revolver. Noah was already hurrying the boys toward the trapdoor that led to the root cellar. Sarah, he said, his voice tight with concern. Let me help. She shook her head. You're still healing, and those boys need their father. Get below. I can shoot, he insisted. I fought in the war. So did I, Sarah replied grimly, and I've been fighting ever since. This is my home, Noah. I'll defend it. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because after a moment he nodded, squeezing her arm briefly before following the boys down into the cellar. The travelers joined them, the woman whimpering softly as her husband helped her down the steep steps. Once they were all below, Sarah closed the trapdoor and pushed a heavy cabinet over it. Then she took up position at the front window, rifle ready, watching as the riders drew closer. There were 8 of them, all men, all armed. They rode with the easy confidence of those accustomed to taking what they wanted without consequence. The leader, a tall man on a black horse, wore a coat with silver buttons that caught the late afternoon sun. Sarah felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the cooling air. She knew that coat, knew the man wearing it, though they'd never formally met. Elijah Reed had found them. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't the first time she'd faced dangerous men, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But as she watched Reed and his men approach, she couldn't help but think of the people hiding in her cellar. Noah and his boys who'd already lost so much. the travelers guilty only of crossing paths with the wrong men. For 3 years, Sarah had lived by one rule: survive. She'd avoided entanglements, kept to herself, focused solely on making it through each day. Now suddenly she had other lives depending on her decisions. "I hope you're watching, Nathaniel," she whispered as she raised her rifle, "because I might be joining you sooner than expected." The riders halted about 50 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Reed raised a hand, signaling to his men to hold position, then urged his horse forward a few paces. "Hello, the house?" he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I'm looking for some travelers who passed this way. 2 men and a woman." "Seen them, huh?" Sarah stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready, but not aimed directly at Reed. "Nobody here but me," she called back, "and I'd prefer to keep it that way." Reed smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, ma'am, I mean no disrespect, but I have reason to believe you're not being entirely truthful. We've been tracking those folks for days, and their trail leads right to your doorstep." "Tracks can be misleading in the desert," Sarah replied evenly. "Wind shifts the sand, changes the signs. Whatever you're looking for, it's not here." Reed studied her for a long moment. Then his gaze moved past her to the cabin, assessing it with the practiced eye of a predator. "That's a lot of laundry on the line for one woman," he observed, "and I count 3 horses in that corral, unless you're in the habit of keeping spares." Sarah said nothing, maintaining her position on the porch. "Let's try another approach," Reed said, his tone shifting to something harder. "I'm also looking for a man named Noah Reed and his 2 boys. Friends of mine paid him a visit a few weeks back, but he was inconsiderate enough to survive. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "Never heard the name," Sarah lied smoothly. "Now I'll thank you to move along. It'll be dark soon, and I don't welcome visitors after sundown." Reed chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You've got spirit, ma'am. I'll give you that. But I'm afraid I can't just move along without having a look inside that cabin of yours." He signaled to his men, who began to spread out further, some moving toward the back of the property. Sarah raised her rifle, aiming directly at Reed. "That would be a mistake," she said, her voice cold and clear in the still air. "The first man who sets foot on my property gets a bullet, starting with you, Mr. Reed." Reed's eyebrows rose slightly at her use of his name. "So you do know who I am. Interesting." He tipped his hat mockingly. "And who might you be, ma'am?" "Someone who prefers to be left alone," Sarah replied. "Something you and your men seem incapable of understanding." "Oh, I understand solitude just fine," Reed said, his hand moving casually to rest on his holstered pistol. "But I also understand that people who want to be left alone often have something to hide. Or someone." The tension stretched between them, each assessing the other, calculating risks and outcomes. Sarah knew she couldn't win against 8 armed men, but she might take a few with her, enough perhaps to give those in the cellar a chance to escape in the confusion. Before either could make a move, a voice called out from the side of the house. "Boss found something!" One of Reed's men appeared, dragging a struggling Ethan by the arm. Sarah's heart sank as she saw the boy. He must have snuck out of the cellar somehow, perhaps through the small ventilation shaft that led to the back of the house. "Well, well," Reed said, his smile widening. "What have we here? Looks like a little bird that flew the coop." He addressed Ethan directly. "What's your name, boy?" Ethan lifted his chin defiantly, though Sarah could see he was trembling. "Let me go," he demanded, trying to pull away from his captor. "Not until you answer my question," Reed said, his voice deceptively gentle. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied reluctantly. "Ethan Reed." Reed's gaze returned to Sarah, triumph in his eyes. "Nobody but you said." He shook his head in mock disappointment. "I dislike being lied to, ma'am. It suggests a lack of respect." Sarah kept her rifle trained on Reed, but her mind was racing. Ethan's capture changed everything. She couldn't risk a direct confrontation now, not with the boy in their hands. "Let him go," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "He's just a child." "Oh, I intend to," Reed assured her. "As soon as his father comes out to join us along with his brother and those 3 travelers you are also hiding. Everyone out in the open, nice and peaceful, and no one needs to get hurt." As if to emphasize his point, the man holding Ethan drew his pistol, holding it casually near the boy's head. Ethan's eyes widened in fear, but to his credit, he didn't cry out. Sarah felt a cold rage building inside her, a familiar companion from her darkest days. She'd seen too many children harmed in her lifetime during the war and the fever that took her own, in the brutal indifference of the desert. She would not stand by and watch it happen again. You want Noah, she called, lowering her rifle slightly. Fine, but the boy stays with me while you talk to him. Reed considered this, then nodded. Bring the boy to the porch, he ordered the man holding Ethan, but keep your gun ready. The man dragged Ethan forward, roughly pushing him toward the cabin. Sarah moved to meet them, positioning herself between the boy and Reed. Inside, Ethan, she said quietly. Find your father. As Ethan darted into the cabin, Sarah raised her voice. Noah Reed wants to talk to you, just you. The boys stay inside. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of furniture being moved. The trap door opened and Noah emerged, his face grim but determined. He moved to stand beside Sarah on the porch, his gaze fixed on Reed. Here I am, Elijah, he said, his voice steady despite the tension evident in every line of his body. Leave these people out of our quarrel. Reed's smile widened. Noah, my old friend, you're looking, well, considering the last time my men saw you, you were half dead and tied to a fence. He looked between Noah and Sarah with new interest. You found yourself a protector, see, how touching. What do you want? Noah asked bluntly. You know what I want, Reed replied, all pretense of pleasantry dropping from his voice. The same thing I wanted when I sent my men to your farm. What you stole from me. I have nothing of yours, Noah said. Lies again, Reed said with a sigh. I'm surrounded by liars today. You took my ledger, Noah, the one that details all my business arrangements with certain government officials, the one that could cause me considerable inconvenience if it fell into the wrong hands. Sarah glanced at Noah, seeing the confirmation in his face, though he didn't speak it aloud. So that was what this was about, evidence of corruption, of crimes that went beyond simple banditry. Even if I had such a thing, Noah said carefully, what makes you think I haven't already sent it to the authorities? Because you're still alive, Reed replied simply. If those papers had reached anyone who mattered, I'd already be in custody. No, you're keeping it as insurance. Smart, but ultimately futile. He leaned forward in his saddle. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me what's mine, and then my men and I are going to leave. No one needs to die today. And if I refuse, Reed's smile turned predatory, then we burn this place to the ground just like your farm. Only this time we make sure the job is finished properly. No survivors. The threat hung in the air, cold and real. Sarah felt Noah tense beside her, knew he was calculating the same odds she had earlier. I need to get something from inside, Noah said finally. It's hidden. Reed nodded. Go ahead, but don't try anything foolish. My men have this place surrounded and they're not known for their patience. As Noah turned to go back inside, Sarah caught his arm. Are you sure about this? She asked in a low voice. He met her eyes and she saw a resolve there that matched her own. Trust me, he whispered. When I come back out, get ready to move. Sarah gave a barely perceptible nod, then released his arm. As Noah disappeared into the cabin, she remained on the porch, rifle held ready, but not raised, watching Reed and his men with wary eyes. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the yard, turning the dust kicked up by the horses' hooves into a golden haze. In another circumstance, it might have been beautiful. Now it just made it harder to see all of Reed's men clearly. Noah returned a few minutes later, a small leather-bound book in his hand. He stepped back onto the porch beside Sarah. Here it is, he called to Reed. Your precious ledger. Reed smiled, satisfaction evident in his expression. Bring it to me, he ordered. First, your men back off, Noah countered. All of them back to where you were when you arrived. Reed hesitated, then nodded to his men, who reluctantly moved their horses back, reforming their semicircle at a greater distance. Satisfied? He asked. Noah took a step forward, then another, moving slowly toward Reed with the ledger held out before him. Sarah watched tensely, her finger resting lightly on the trigger of her rifle, ready to react at the first sign of treachery. When Noah was about 10 yards from Reed, he stopped. Close enough, he said. Call off the men at the back of the house, too. Reed frowned. What men? Don't play games, Elijah. I counted 8 riders. 3 are unaccounted for. A slow smile spread across Reed's face. Always the observant one, weren't it you, Noah? Even as a boy. He raised his hand and made a sharp gesture. After a moment, 3 riders emerged from behind the cabin, moving to join the others. They're all present and accounted for. Now the ledger. Noah held it up, then deliberately dropped it on the ground between them. Come and get it! Reed's eyes narrowed. Pick it up and hand it to me, Noah. Don't test my patience. No, Noah replied calmly. You want it, you dismount and get it yourself. I'm tired of doing your bidding. For a long moment, Reed didn't move clearly, weighing his options. Then with a fluid motion that belied his size, he swung down from his horse. He approached the ledger cautiously, never taking his eyes off Noah. You always were stubborn, Reed remarked as he bent to retrieve the book. Even when we were children. Never knew when to back down from a fight. Some things never change. Noah agreed, his hand moving slowly toward his back. Sarah saw it happening as if in slow motion, Noah drawing the revolver he'd concealed at his waistband, Reed straightening the ledger in one hand, his other hand moving to his own weapon. The sudden tension in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Now, Noah shouted, and Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired at the nearest of Reed's men, hitting him squarely in the chest. The man toppled from his horse as chaos erupted. Noah dove to the side as Reed fired the bullet, splintering the porch post where he had been standing moments before. Sarah dropped to one knee using the porch railing for cover as she fired again, then again. Reed's men were returning fire now, bullets thudding into the cabin walls around her. She heard a scream from inside one of the travelers, perhaps, and prayed that the boys were safely under cover. Noah had rolled beneath the porch, firing up at Reed, who had retreated behind his fallen horse. Two more of Reed's men were down, but the others had spread out, using the gathering darkness for cover. Sarah, Noah's voice came from beneath the porch. The back door. She understood immediately someone was trying to enter the cabin from behind. She scrambled to her feet and ran inside, keeping low to avoid the bullets still coming through the windows. Oliver was in the main room, Noah's second revolver clutched in his hands, aiming shakily at the back door. The travelers were huddled in the far corner, away from the windows. Stay down, Sarah ordered, moving quickly to the back door just as it began to open. She fired through the wood, hearing a grunt of pain from the other side. The door slammed shut again. Oliver, she said, not taking her eyes from the door. Get everyone into the bedroom. Mattress against the wall. Go. The boy nodded, his face pale but determined, as he herded the others into the small bedroom. Sarah moved to a window, risking a glance outside. She could see muzzle flashes in the gathering darkness, hear the sharp crack of gunfire. Noah was still returning fire from beneath the porch, but she couldn't tell if he was hit. A crash from the front of the cabin made her spin around. One of Reed's men had smashed through a window and was climbing inside. Sarah fired twice, hitting him in the shoulder and chest. He fell back with a cry, disappearing from view. The gunfire outside had intensified. Sarah counted at least 3 different weapons firing, but something was wrong. Some of the shots seemed to be directed away from the cabin toward the perimeter where Reed's men had positioned themselves. Then she heard a new voice shouting commands, more riders appearing from the darkness, firing at Reed's men. Reinforcements, but whose Sarah didn't have time to wonder. She reloaded her revolver quickly, then moved to the front door, easing it open just enough to see outside. The scene was chaos, horses, rearing men shouting, the flash of gunfire, illuminating the darkness in brief strobe-like bursts. And there in the midst of it all was Noah, locked in hand-to-hand combat with Reed. The two men grappled in the dirt, each trying to gain the advantage, their faces twisted with effort and old hatred. Sarah raised her revolver, trying to get a clear shot at Reed, but the men were moving too quickly, too entangled. She couldn't risk hitting Noah. A movement to her right caught her attention. One of Reed's men, bleeding from a wound in his side, was aiming his pistol at Noah's back. Without hesitation, Sarah fired her bullet, catching the man in the throat. He collapsed, his shot going wild. The sound of galloping hooves drew her attention back to the main fight. Most of Reed's remaining men were fleeing, pursued by the mysterious new arrivals. Only Reed himself remained still, struggling with Noah. Sarah moved out onto the porch, keeping her revolver trained on the pair. As she watched, Noah managed to land a solid blow to Reed's jaw, sending him sprawling onto his back. Noah stood over him, chest heaving, a bloodied knife in his hand. "It's over, Elijah," he panted. "Your men are gone. You've lost." Reed looked up at his brother, blood trickling from his split lip. "It's never over, Noah," he replied, his voice chillingly calm. "You know that better than anyone." Noah's grip tightened on the knife. "I should kill you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For Rebecca, for all the others you've destroyed." Reed smiled, that same cold smile that never reached his eyes. But you won't, he said confidently, because you're still the same weak, sentimental fool you have always been, just like Joseph. At the mention of that name, something changed in Noah's face, a flicker of old pain quickly replaced by resolve. He stepped back, lowering the knife. You're right, he said quietly. I won't kill you, not because I'm weak, but because I choose a different path. Joseph understood that. You never did. He turned away, and in that moment, Reed moved with startling speed, drawing a small pistol from his boot. Sarah saw it happening, saw his finger tightening on the trigger as he aimed at Noah's back. Noah, she shouted, raising her own weapon. Two shots rang out simultaneously. Reed jerked as Sarah's bullet struck his shoulder, his own shot going wide. He fell back, clutching at the wound, his face contorted with pain and rage. The newcomers were converging on them now, and Sarah could see they wore the badges of U.S. Marshals. One of them dismounted quickly, moving to secure Reed, while others pursued the last of his fleeing men. Noah stood frozen for a moment, then turned to look at Sarah, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude, relief, and something deeper that she couldn't quite name. You saved my life, he said simply. Sarah lowered her revolver, suddenly aware of how badly her hands were shaking. We're even now, she replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The marshal who had secured Reed approached them, his weathered face serious beneath his hat. Noah Reed, he asked, looking between them. Noah nodded. Marshal Taylor, you got my message. Just in time from the looks of it. The marshal glanced at Sarah. Ma'am, you all right? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving her lightheaded and trembling. She sank down onto the porch steps, trying to steady her breathing. Noah moved to sit beside her, wincing slightly. In the dim light, she could see a gash on his forehead and bruising already forming on his jaw. The children, she said, suddenly remembering. Are they? They're safe, Noah assured her. I checked the bedroom before I came out. Oliver has them all well protected. Relief washed over Sarah, so intense it was almost painful. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd come to care for those boys in the short time they'd been with her. As the marshals began to organize, securing Reed and the other captured men treating the wounded, Sarah and Noah sat in silence on the porch steps. The night had fully descended, now the stars emerging one by one in the vast desert sky. I owe you an explanation, Noah said finally, his voice low. About Reed, about all of this. Sarah looked at him, seeing the weariness in his face, the weight of secrets long carried. Not tonight, she said gently. Tonight we just survive. Explanations can wait for morning. Noah nodded, understanding in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. Sarah didn't respond, but she allowed her shoulder to rest lightly against his, a small comfort in the aftermath of violence. Together they watched as the marshals worked, as order slowly emerged from chaos as the night deepened around them. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt something unexpected stirring within her, not just the will to survive, but perhaps tentatively the courage to live again. Dawn broke over Sarah's homestead, painting the desert in hues of amber and rose. The night's violence felt like a fever dream in the gentle morning light, but the evidence remained: bullet holes peppering the cabin walls, bloodstains darkening the earth, marshals moving about the property with the quiet efficiency of men accustomed to aftermath. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee she hadn't tasted. She'd been awake all night, first helping tend to the wounded, then sitting with the boys as they finally fell into exhausted sleep. The travelers, Matthew, Caleb, and Sarah, had been moved to the barn where they, too, now rested under the watchful eye of one of the marshals. Elijah Reed and his surviving men had been secured in a makeshift camp some distance from the cabin. Marshal Taylor had decided it was too risky to move them immediately, given Reed's shoulder wound and the darkness. They would leave at first light, he'd said. That time had now come. The door opened and Noah entered, his face haggard from the night's events. He'd been with the marshals, Sarah knew, giving his statement, explaining the history that had led to this bloody confrontation. They're preparing to leave, he said, easing himself into the chair across from her, taking Reed to Santa Fe to stand trial. Sarah nodded, finally taking a sip of her coffee. It had gone cold. Will you go with them? Not yet. Taylor wants me to follow in a few days once things are settled here. He needs me to testify, of course. The ledger is important evidence. Evidence of what exactly? Sarah asked, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since the fighting had ended. Noah was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. Corruption, he said finally. Bribery of officials, trafficking, murder. He looked down at his hands, which were still stained with dried blood, his own or his brother's. Pera couldn't tell. Elijah has built quite an empire out here far from proper authority. The ledger details all of it, names, dates, amounts paid. And you stole it from him. It wasn't a question, but Noah answered anyway. Yes, when I realized what he was involved in, what he was doing, he shook his head. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not again. Sarah studied him, seeing beyond the immediate exhaustion to the deeper weariness he carried. You mentioned a name during the fight, she said carefully. Joseph. Reed said something about him too. Noah's face tightened, old pain surfacing in his eyes. My brother, he said after a long pause. My twin. He died 2 years ago. Killed by Reed, in a manner of speaking. Noah's gaze drifted to the window, to the dawn light strengthening over the desert. Joseph and I were both ministers in a small town in Missouri. When Elijah came to visit, we didn't recognize the darkness in him at first. He was charming, generous, said he'd made his fortune out west and wanted to reconnect with family. Sarah waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. He stayed for several weeks. During that time, young women from our congregation began to disappear. 3 of them. Everyone assumed they had run off to seek better opportunities in the city. But Joseph, he suspected something worse. Noah's voice had grown tight, controlled. He confronted Elijah, who denied everything, of course. But Joseph wouldn't let it go. He started asking questions, following leads. He found something, Sarah guessed. Noah nodded. Evidence that Elijah was trafficking young women, selling them to brothels and private buyers across the territories. When Joseph threatened to go to the authorities, Elijah, he swallowed hard. There was a fire at Joseph's church. They said it was an accident, a lamp overturned during a struggle with an intruder. Joseph died trying to save a child who'd been sleeping in one of the back rooms. But you knew it wasn't an accident. I knew my brother Elijah, Noah said simply. After the funeral, I found Joseph's journal. He'd documented everything, names, locations, even a mention of the ledger. I realized then that the intruder had been looking for those notes. So you went after the ledger yourself, Sarah concluded. Not immediately. I was lost after Joseph's death. Rebecca, my wife, she tried to help me through it, but I couldn't let go of the guilt. I should have believed Joseph sooner, should have helped him. Noah's hands clenched on the table. 2 months later, Rebecca was found dead in our garden. Another accident. She'd fallen and struck her head on a stone, they said. Sarah felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Reed, I couldn't prove it, but yes, I'm certain. That's when I took the boys and left Missouri. I tracked Elijah west, discovered he'd established himself as a power in this territory. It took me nearly a year to locate the ledger and steal it. A ghost of a smile touched Noah's lips. He never expected his minister brother to become a thief. And he's been hunting you ever since. Noah nodded. I thought we'd lost him when we settled at the farm. I was wrong. Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing his story. It explained so much, the way Noah sometimes woke, shouting his brother's name in the notebook, with the sketch of a face so like his own, the burden he carried that went beyond mere grief. I'm sorry, she said finally, about Joseph, about Rebecca. Thank you. Noah looked at her with a weary gratitude. I should have told you everything from the beginning. You deserve to know what kind of danger I was bringing to your door. Would it have made a difference? Sarah asked pragmatically. You and your boys still needed help. Reed would have found you eventually, whether you were here or elsewhere. Before Noah could respond, the door opened again, and Oliver entered, his young face solemn. Marshal Taylor is asking for you, Papa, he said. They're ready to leave. Noah nodded, rising from his chair with a suppressed groan. His body was still recovering from the previous attack, and the night's fighting had added new injuries. Tell him I'll be right there. As Oliver went back outside, Noah turned to Sarah. I want to thank you again for everything. Once I've testified in Santa Fe, the boys and I will move on. You've risked enough for us already. Sarah felt an unexpected pang at his words. The thought of the cabin returning to its former silence of meals, taken alone of no small voices, calling her name, left her feeling hollow, but she merely nodded, keeping her expression neutral. You do what you need to, she said. The boy's safety comes first. Noah studied her face for a moment, as if searching for something more behind her words. Then he nodded and headed for the door. Sarah remained at the table, listening to the sounds of the marshals preparing to depart horses, being saddled men calling to one another, the creak of wagon wheels. She should go out, she knew, see them off properly. But something kept her rooted to her chair, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The confrontation with Reed had stirred up memories she'd worked hard to suppress. The raid on the supply wagon 2 years ago, the man she'd killed afterward. The child conceived in violence and lost before its first breath. She'd thought those ghosts safely buried, but now they walked with her again, their whispers louder in the daylight than they'd been in darkness. Eventually she rose and went to the door, watching as Marshal Taylor and his men secured Reed and the other prisoners in a wagon. Noah stood nearby, speaking intently with Taylor, occasionally gesturing toward the cabin, discussing her perhaps or arrangements for the coming days. The travelers were preparing to leave as well, their horses saddled and ready. Sarah looked better this morning, some color returned to her pale cheeks. She caught Sarah Harlow's eye and offered a tentative smile of gratitude. As the marshals mounted up, Noah turned toward the cabin, his eyes finding Sarah in the doorway. He said something to Taylor, then walked over to her, his expression grave. "Taylor wants to leave a man here," he said without preamble, "in case any of Reed's associates come looking." Sarah shook her head. "I don't need a guard. I've managed on my own this long." "This is different," Noah insisted. "Reed has connections, powerful ones. Once word spreads that he's been captured, those connections may want to tie up loose ends. Meaning me. Meaning all of us." Noah's concern was evident in the lines of his face. "Please, Sarah, at least for a few days until we know it's safe." Sarah wanted to refuse to assert her independence as she always had, but the memory of Reed's cold smile of his men surrounding her home gave her pause. It wasn't just her safety at stake anymore. There were the boys to consider and the travelers who'd been unwittingly drawn into this conflict. "Fine," she conceded reluctantly, "but just one man and only for a few days." Relief flickered across Noah's face. "Thank you. Deputy Wilson will stay. He's young but capable." He hesitated, then added, "I need to go into town with Taylor, just for the day to make a formal statement. The boys will stay here if that's all right." "Of course," Sarah said, surprised he felt the need to ask. "They'll be safe with me." Noah nodded, gratitude in his eyes. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but Marshal Taylor called his name, impatience clear in his tone. "I should go," Noah said. "I'll be back by nightfall." Dawn broke over the eastern hills in streaks of lavender and gold, the desert awakening slowly beneath its gentle light. Sarah stood at the edge of the canyon, Willow's reins loose in her hand, watching as Matthew and his men moved into position. They were professionals, that much was evident in their silent communication, their careful movements, their unwavering focus. Noah waited beside her, his face set in grim determination. The burden of his past seemed to weigh heavier on him this morning, etched in the lines around his eyes, the tightness of his jaw. This was personal for him in a way it wasn't for the others, one final act of atonement for the brother he couldn't save. "Remember," Matthew said quietly as he prepared to lead his group toward the canyon entrance. "We create the diversion, draw their attention forward. You three come in from above, get the girls out. No heroics." His gaze lingered on Noah. "This isn't about revenge, it's about rescue." Noah nodded, though Sarah saw the muscle working in his cheek. "Understood." "We'll meet at the rendezvous point by noon," Matthew continued. "If anything goes wrong, if anyone doesn't make it, the secondary meeting point is the Split Rock Formation 5 miles west." Sarah tightened the straps on her pack, checking her weapons one last time. The weight of her revolver against her hip was reassuring, as was the rifle slung across her back. She'd insisted on carrying the medical supplies as well, knowing that the girls might need immediate attention once freed. Deputy Wilson had remained at the homestead with the boys and Abigail, much to Oliver's vocal disappointment. The boy had wanted to join them to help rescue the girls, but Noah had been firm. "Your job is to protect your brother and Abigail," he told him. "That's no small responsibility." 10 minutes, Matthew said, checking his pocket watch. "Then we move." As Matthew's group melted away into the shadows of the canyon floor, Caleb turned to Sarah and Noah. "Let's get to our position. We'll need to move fast once the diversion starts." They left their horses secured in a small grove of stunted junipers, well hidden from casual observation, and made their way on foot toward the ridge Sarah had used for her earlier reconnaissance. The climb was steep in places, loose shale sliding beneath their boots, but they moved silently, each focused on the task ahead. From their vantage point, they could see the camp below stirring with early morning activity. Two men stood guard near the makeshift pen where the girls were still huddled together sleeping or pretending to sleep. Another man tended a small fire while the remaining two were nowhere to be seen inside the tents, perhaps, or patrolling the perimeter. "5, just as you reported," Caleb whispered, studying the scene through field glasses. "All armed. The girls look unharmed, but the little one doesn't seem to be moving much." Sarah felt her heart tighten at his words. She'd noticed it too. The smallest girl lay curled against the oldest unnaturally still, compared to the restless movements of the others. "We need to hurry," she murmured. Noah nodded, his gaze never leaving the camp below. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, his knuckles white with tension. Sarah could almost feel the rage emanating from him, a cold, controlled fury directed at the men who trafficked in human misery. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Then, precisely on schedule, gunshots erupted from the canyon entrance, followed by shouting and the thunder of hooves. Matthew's diversion had begun. The effect on the camp was immediate. The men at the fire and near the pen sprang to their feet, weapons drawn. The two missing men emerged from the largest tent, hastily buckling gun belts. Orders were shouted, positions taken up facing the direction of the attack. "Now," Caleb whispered, and they were moving, descending the slope as quickly and quietly as possible, using the confusion and noise as cover. They were halfway down when one of the guards glanced back and spotted them. "Behind us," he shouted, swinging his rifle in their direction. Caleb's revolver barked once and the man fell, but the alarm had been raised. Another guard turned, firing wildly in their direction. Sarah felt the wind of a bullet pass her cheek as she ducked behind a boulder. Noah returned fire, his shots more measured, more precise. "Keep moving," he called to Sarah. "Get to the girls." Sarah darted from cover to cover, closing the distance to the pen. She could see the girls clearly now, the oldest, perhaps 12, shielding the others with her body, the middle child around 9, wide-eyed with terror, and the youngest, no more than 7, lying too still on the ground. One of the guards fell to Noah's accurate fire, but the remaining 3 had taken cover, making themselves difficult targets. A bullet splintered rock near Sarah's head, showering her with fragments. She fired back, not aiming to kill, but to keep the men pinned down while she reached the pen. "Stay down," she called to the girls as she finally reached the crude structure. "I'm here to help you." The oldest girl stared at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Who are you, Bem?" "A friend," Sarah replied, working to untie the rope that secured the pen's entrance. "Abigail sent me. We're getting you out of here." At the mention of Abigail, the girl's expression changed, relief washing over her features. "She made it. She's safe." "She did. She's safe." The rope came free, and Sarah pulled the makeshift gate open. "Quickly now. Can you carry the little one?" The oldest girl nodded, gathering the smallest child in her arms. Sarah saw with relief that the young girl was conscious, though feverish and weak. "Follow me," Sarah instructed, turning to provide covering fire as the girls emerged from the pen. "Stay low. Move fast." Noah and Caleb had maintained a steady barrage, keeping the remaining guards occupied, but one had worked his way to a position with a clear line of sight to the pen. As Sarah shepherded the girls toward the shelter of a large boulder, he rose from cover, taking aim. Sarah saw him too late, already committed to her movement. She tried to twist to place herself between the girls and the threat, knowing she wouldn't be fast enough. The shot came, but not from the guard. From somewhere to Sarah's right, a rifle cracked, and the guard fell backward, a spray of red misting the air. Sarah glanced toward the sound and saw Matthew having circled around from the front of the canyon, his rifle still raised. With the immediate threat eliminated, Sarah hurried the girls to cover. The oldest met her eyes with quiet determination. "I'm Rebecca," she said. "This is Hannah." She nodded to the middle child. "And Lily." She looked down at the smallest girl in her arms. "She's been sick for days. They wouldn't give us medicine." "We'll take care of her," Sarah promised, quickly checking Lily's pulse and temperature. The child was burning with fever, her breathing shallow. "We need to get her back to the homestead as soon as possible." The shooting had died down, most of the guards either dead or fled. Noah appeared at Sarah's side, his face lined with concern, as he took in the condition of the youngest girl. "She needs help," Sarah told him. "We need to move quickly." Noah nodded, then looked to Rebecca. "Can you walk? It's not far to our horses." Rebecca straightened her shoulders, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I can do whatever I need to for them." There was something in her gaze, a determination beyond her years, that struck a chord in Sarah. This girl had been protecting the younger ones, bearing burdens no child should have to carry, just as Oliver had done for Ethan. "Noah, Caleb," Matthew called from nearby. "We've got a problem. Two of them got away, headed deeper into the canyon." Noah's expression hardened. "They'll bring reinforcements." "All the more reason to move quickly," Sarah said, already helping Hannah to her feet. "The path to the horses is clear. Let's go." Matthew nodded. "The path to the horses is clear. My men will cover our retreat." Sarah took a few moments to examine Lily more thoroughly before they moved. The girl's small face was flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Sarah took a kerchief from her pocket, dampened it with water from her canteen, and gently wiped the child's face. "This will help cool her a little," she said to Rebecca. "We'll get her proper medicine soon." The journey back to the horses was tense but uneventful. The girls moved as quickly as they could, Rebecca refusing all offers to take Lily from her arms until they reached the animals. Then only reluctantly she allowed Noah to take the child, watching anxiously as he settled her carefully on his horse. "Can you ride?" Sarah asked Rebecca. The girl nodded. "My pa had horses. Before." She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. Before her life was shattered. Sarah helped Rebecca mount Willow, then swung up behind her. Hannah rode with Caleb, while Matthew and his men formed a protective screen around them as they set off toward the homestead. They traveled in silence for the most part, pushing the horses as much as they dared given their passengers. Sarah could feel Rebecca's tension in the rigid set of her shoulders, in the way she kept craning her neck to check on Lily and Hannah. "They're strong," Sarah said quietly, hoping to offer some comfort. "You can see it in their faces. Like you." Rebecca nodded, not looking back. "They have to be," she replied simply. "We all do." After a moment she asked, "Did you really arrest Mr. Reed, the man who runs everything?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "He's being taken to Santa Fe to stand trial." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "He's my uncle," she said finally, her voice small but steady. "My father's brother." Sarah felt a chill despite the growing heat of the day. "I didn't know. My parents died last year. Influenza. Uncle Elijah offered to take me in." Rebecca's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "He seemed kind at first. Then he sold me to those men, said I needed to earn my keep." The casual cruelty of it struck Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of her own lost children, of the lengths she would have gone to protect them. How could anyone harm a child in their care, let alone sell them like cattle? "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to offer something. "That should never have happened to you. To any of you." Rebecca shrugged, a gesture too old for her years. "Doesn't matter now," she said. "We're free." But it did matter. Sarah knew such wounds didn't heal simply because the immediate danger had passed. They lingered, shaped a person in ways both visible and hidden. "It matters," she said firmly. "What was done to you was wrong. But you survived, Rebecca. You protected Hannah and Lily. That takes remarkable courage." Rebecca turned slightly, studying Sarah's face, as if searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded once, a barely perceptible acknowledgement, before turning forward again. They rode on the landscape, gradually becoming familiar as they approached Sarah's homestead. The sun was high overhead, now beating down with merciless intensity. Lily had begun to whimper in her fevered sleep, a sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge with worry. As they crested the final rise, the homestead came into view. Sarah felt a surprising surge of emotion at the sight of it, not just relief at reaching safety, but something deeper, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. There was Oliver standing the watch on the porch, Ethan bouncing excitedly beside him as he spotted their approach. Deputy Wilson emerging from the barn, hand on his holstered pistol, until he recognized them. Home. Somehow, without her noticing, the solitary cabin had become home again, in a way it hadn't been since she lost her family. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the more immediate concern of getting Lily inside and treated. Oliver was already running to meet them as they reached the corral, his young face alight with relief and concern. "Pa, Miss Sarah, you made it." Noah dismounted carefully, Lily cradled in his arms. "We did, son, and we brought friends who need our help." He looked at Sarah. "What do you need me to do?" "Prepare the bedroom for the girls," Sarah instructed, helping Rebecca dismount. "Clean sheets, water for washing, and ask Abigail to heat water for tea, willow bark for fever." Oliver nodded and ran back to the cabin, already calling instructions to Ethan. Deputy Wilson approached, taking the reins of the horses as Matthew and his men dismounted. "Any trouble here?" Matthew asked the deputy. "No, sir. All quiet." Relief washed over Sarah, so intense it was almost painful. They had made it. The girls were safe. Now they just had to nurse Lily back to health. Inside, Abigail had water heating and fresh linens laid out on the bed. Her face lit up at the sight of the rescued girls, tears springing to her eyes as Rebecca rushed to embrace her. "You came back for us," Hannah said, her voice small with wonder as she joined the embrace. "You really did." "I promised, didn't I?" Abigail replied, holding them tightly. Sarah moved past the reunion to where Noah was gently laying Lily on the bed. The child's face was flushed with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. Sarah placed a hand on her forehead, alarmed at the heat radiating from her skin. "High fever," she murmured, already reaching for her medical supplies. "Likely pneumonia from exposure and exhaustion." Noah watched with concern as Sarah began her examination. "Will she be all right?" Sarah hesitated, unwilling to offer false hope. "I don't know," she admitted. "She needs medicine I don't have. In the war, we would have given her quinine." "I have quinine," Matthew said from the doorway. "Standard issue for operations in territory where malaria is present." Sarah looked up sharply. "Bring it quickly." As Matthew hurried to fetch the medicine, Sarah continued her examination, listening to Lily's labored breathing, checking her pulse, inspecting for other injuries or ailments. The child was malnourished and dehydrated, in addition to the fever, but Sarah found no wounds beyond scrapes and bruises. "Rebecca," she called softly, "can you tell me how long Lily has been sick?" Rebecca disengaged from Abigail's embrace and moved to the bedside. "3 days, I think. It started with coughing, then the fever came. She was still walking on her own yesterday morning, but by evening," she swallowed hard, "she wouldn't wake up properly. They wouldn't give us anything to help her." Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral, despite the anger that flared within her. "You did well to keep her alive," she told Rebecca. "Now we'll take care of her." Matthew returned with the quinine, and Sarah set to work administering the medicine and instructing the others in the care they would need to provide cool cloths for the fever, small sips of water, willow bark tea for pain. "Someone should stay with her at all times," she said. "Watch for changes in her breathing or color." "I'll stay," Rebecca said immediately. "We'll take turns," Noah amended gently. "You need rest too, Rebecca. The worst is over now." The girl looked ready to protest, but Abigail placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's right," she said. "You can't help Lily if you collapse from exhaustion." Rebecca reluctantly agreed, allowing Abigail to lead her and Hannah to wash up and change into clean clothes that Ethan had brought some of Sarah's altered hastily to fit their smaller frames. Outside the bedroom, Matthew was conferring quietly with Caleb and his men. He looked up as Sarah approached. "We need to move out," he said without preamble. "Those 2 who escaped will bring reinforcements. This place isn't defensible against a large force." Sarah glanced around at the cabin she'd called home for 3 years, at the small touches that made it hers: Nathaniel's books on the shelf, William's carved wooden horse on the mantel, the quilt Anna had helped sew before the twins were born. The thought of abandoning it sent a pang through her heart. "The girl can't be moved," she said, nodding toward the bedroom where Lily lay. "Not in her condition." Matthew's expression was sympathetic but firm. "We can't stay here, ma'am. It's too exposed. They know where to find us, and they'll come in force." "How long do we have?" Noah asked, joining the conversation. "A day, maybe less," Caleb estimated. "Depends on how far they have to go for help." Noah looked to Sarah, understanding in his eyes. "It's your home," he said quietly. "Your decision." Sarah felt the weight of that choice of lives now depending on her judgment. She thought of the girls, of Oliver and Ethan, of all they'd been through already, of Lily fighting for her life in the next room. "We'll leave at first light," she decided. "If Lily improves enough to travel. If not," she straightened her shoulders, "then those who can go should go. I'll stay with her." "Sarah," Noah began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I've made my choice, Noah. I won't abandon a sick child, and I won't risk the lives of those well enough to escape." Matthew nodded, accepting her decision. "We'll post guards prepare for defense, just in case. But I strongly recommend everyone else be ready to move out tomorrow morning." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Noah remained, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "If Lily can't travel, I'll stay too." Sarah shook her head. Your boys need you. They've lost enough already. They need you too, Noah replied, his voice rough with emotion. We all do. On the simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had fully acknowledged until now. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling that she'd built brick by brick over years of solitude. We'll see how Lily is in the morning, she said finally, unable to address the deeper current of his words. For now, let's focus on getting everyone fed and rested. Noah nodded, accepting her deflection for the moment, but his eyes told her the conversation wasn't over. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Matthew's men established a perimeter around the homestead, setting up watches and taking turns resting. Abigail and the boys helped prepare a simple but hearty meal for everyone, while Sarah divided her time between caring for Lily and organizing supplies for the potential journey ahead. As evening fell, an uneasy quiet settled over the cabin. The girls and boys were bedded down in the main room, Abigail watching over them. Matthew and most of his men maintained their positions outside, vigilant for any sign of approach. Sarah sat beside Lily's bed, bathing the child's fevered face with cool water. The quinine seemed to be helping, and the girl's breathing was less labored, though the fever still burned hot. Rebecca had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled on a pallet beside the bed, her hands stretched out to maintain contact with Lily even in sleep. Noah entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah, then took a seat on the other side of the bed. Any change? He asked softly. Some improvement, Sarah replied. Her breathing is easier. If the fever breaks overnight, she might be strong enough to travel by wagon. Noah nodded, his gaze moving from Lily to Rebecca, then back to Sarah. You're good at this, he observed. Caring for the sick. It's more than just your training as a nurse, isn't it? Sarah shrugged slightly. I've had practice, she said, thinking of the long days and nights, tending her own children through the fever that eventually took them. You did everything you could for them, Noah said gently, seeming to read her thoughts. Sometimes everything isn't enough, Sarah said, the old grief surfacing despite her efforts to suppress it. No, Noah agreed, but it's all we can offer, that and love. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching over the sleeping child. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the cabin, stars emerging one by one in the vast expanse of sky. What will happen to them? Sarah asked eventually. Rebecca and the others after all this is over. Noah sighed, running a hand through his hair. Matthew says there's an orphanage in Santa Fe that takes in such cases. It's run by nuns, well regarded. An orphanage? Sarah repeated the word, leaving a bitter taste. She'd seen such places during the war, well-intentioned, but often cold, institutional, lacking the warmth of a true home. They'll be safe there, Noah said, though his tone lacked conviction. Fed, educated, given a chance at a new start. Sarah looked at Rebecca's sleeping form, at the protective way she'd positioned herself between the door and Lily, even in sleep. They deserve more than safety, she said quietly. They deserve a home, family. Yes, Noah agreed simply. They do. His gaze met hers across the bed, and Sarah saw in his eyes the same thought that had been growing in her own mind, a possibility she'd scarcely allowed herself to consider until now. Before either could give voice to it, the door opened and Matthew entered. Sorry to interrupt, he said in a low voice, but we've got movement on the perimeter, someone approaching from the west. Noah was on his feet instantly. Hostile? Single rider, Matthew replied, moving slowly. Could be a scout. Could be a traveler. Caleb's keeping an eye on them. I'll come with you, Noah said, already reaching for his gun belt. Sarah rose as well. I'll check on the others, make sure everyone stays quiet and away from the windows. They moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to crisis, each to their assigned task. Sarah paused only long enough to ensure Rebecca remained asleep before slipping into the main room where Abigail was already awake and alert. I heard, she whispered. The boys are still sleeping. Should I wake them? Not yet, Sarah decided. Let's see what we're dealing with first. She moved to the window, carefully peering out from the edge of the curtain. In the moonlight, she could make out Noah and Matthew joining Caleb at the edge of the property, all three with weapons drawn but not raised. Beyond them, a lone figure on horseback approached slowly, hands clearly visible and empty. As the rider drew closer, Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. It was a woman, slender and straight-backed, despite obvious exhaustion. Even in the dim light, there was something familiar about her bearing, about the way she held herself in the saddle. The men seemed to reach the same conclusion, lowering their weapons slightly as they called out a challenge. The woman responded, her voice too distant for Sarah to make out the words. But something in Noah's posture changed, a sudden tension, a disbelieving stillness. Sarah watched as Noah took a step forward, then another, moving toward the rider with the cautious wonder of a man approaching a mirage. The woman dismounted, standing before him, her face now visible in the moonlight. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the resemblance, the same features that graced Rebecca's young face, but older, worn by time and hardship. "She looks like Rebecca," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning like a cold wave. Noah's wife, the woman he believed dead. She watched as Noah reached out a trembling hand to touch the woman's face, as if confirming she was real and not a ghost. The woman said something that made Noah step back, his body language shifting from wonder to wariness. Sarah couldn't bear the suspense any longer. Checking that Abigail had the children well in hand, she slipped outside, moving quietly toward the tableau at the edge of the property. As she drew closer, she could hear the woman speaking, her voice low and urgent. "I had no choice, Noah. Elijah would have killed the children too if he'd known they were alive. I had to let him believe he'd succeeded." "2 years, Rebecca," Noah was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "2 years I mourned you. I buried an empty coffin." "I know," Rebecca replied, pain evident in her voice. "I watched from a distance. It broke my heart, but I had to be sure Elijah believed I was dead. I've been hiding, gathering evidence against him, trying to find a way to bring him down without endangering you and the boys." Matthew stepped forward, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Captain Matthew Taylor, U.S. Army. We've been investigating your brother-in-law's operation for some time. Any evidence you have would be invaluable." Rebecca nodded. "I have names, dates, locations, records of bribes to officials on his payroll." She turned back to Noah. "I came as soon as I heard he'd been captured. I thought it was finally safe to return." Her voice faltered. "Are the boys—" "They're alive," Noah confirmed. "They're inside, safe." Relief washed over Rebecca's face, followed quickly by apprehension. "And my niece, Rebecca, Elijah's brother's child. I've been searching for her since he took her." "She's here too," Sarah said, stepping forward, "along with 2 other girls rescued from one of Reed's camps." Rebecca's gaze shifted to her, assessing and wary. "You are Sarah Harlow," she replied, maintaining a neutral tone despite the turmoil of emotions within her. "This is my home." Something passed across Rebecca's face, a flicker of understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sheltering my family." The sincerity in her voice made it impossible for Sarah to resent her, despite the complicated feelings churning in her chest. This was Noah's wife, Oliver, and Ethan's mother, believed dead for 2 years. It was a miracle, the kind of reunion Sarah herself had prayed for in the dark days after losing her own family. "They've been through a lot," Sarah said. "The boys will be overwhelmed to see you." Rebecca nodded, a mixture of eagerness and trepidation in her expression. "I've dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it's here—" She glanced at Noah uncertainly. "Perhaps it would be better to wait until morning," Sarah suggested, "to give them time to prepare." Rebecca seemed torn, but Noah shook his head. "I don't know if that's wise," he said. "There's danger coming. We plan to leave at dawn." "Danger?" Rebecca asked sharply. Matthew, who had been conferring quietly with Caleb, rejoined the conversation. "Mrs. Reed's arrival changes things," he said. "The information she carries is too valuable to risk. I recommend we move out immediately under cover of darkness. Less chance of being spotted." "Lily is still too ill to travel," Sarah objected. "Who is Lily?" Rebecca asked. "The youngest of the girls we rescued," Noah explained. "She has pneumonia, a high fever. Sarah's been caring for her." Rebecca's expression softened with concern. "How old?" "About 7, Sarah replied. "I worked with my father, a doctor, before I married Noah," Rebecca said, turning to Matthew. "Captain, I understand the urgency, but I will not leave a sick child behind." She glanced at Sarah. "Nor will I ask others to risk themselves by staying. With respect, the information I carry could bring down not just Elijah, but an entire network of corruption that spans 3 territories." Sarah found a surprising surge of respect for this woman she'd just met. Rebecca Reed might have been in hiding for 2 years, might have allowed her family to believe her dead, but her moral compass remained true. We stay until morning. Noah decided, his tone brooking no argument. All of us. We'll leave at first light with Lily properly secured in a wagon for travel. Matthew looked like he wanted to object further, but instead nodded curtly. I'll have my men prepare the wagons and horses tonight. We'll be ready to move at dawn. He moved away, taking Caleb with him to make the necessary arrangements. Left alone with Noah and Rebecca, Sarah felt suddenly awkward, an intruder in a reunion that deserved privacy. I should check on Lily, she said, beginning to step away. Wait, Rebecca said, reaching out a hand, though not quite touching Sarah. I'd like to see her and the other girls if I may. Perhaps I can help with Lily's care. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Of course, they're asleep, but we can look in on them. As they walked back to the cabin, Noah fell into step beside Rebecca, their shoulders not quite touching the space between them, charged with unspoken words. Sarah led the way, her own emotions carefully contained behind a neutral expression. Inside, Abigail looked up sharply as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Rebecca. Sarah made brief introductions, explaining in hushed tones who Rebecca was and why she had come. The boys were still asleep, curled on their pallets in the corner. Rebecca moved towards them, as if drawn by an invisible force, her steps hesitant yet determined. She knelt beside them, drinking in the sight of their sleeping faces, one hand hovering over Ethan's tousled hair, but not quite making contact, as if afraid he might vanish at her touch. They've grown so much, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan was just a baby when, she swallowed hard. And Oliver, he looks like you now, Noah. Noah knelt beside her, his own emotions evident in the tremor of his hands, the brightness of his eyes. They're strong, he said softly, resilient, like their mother. Rebecca turned to him, tears streaming freely down her face. Can you ever forgive me for letting you believe, for not finding a way to tell you? There's nothing to forgive, Noah replied, his voice rough. You did what you had to do to protect them, to protect all of us. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. You're here now, that's what matters. Sarah turned away, unable to watch this intimate moment any longer. I'll check on Lily, she murmured to Abigail, who nodded, understanding in her eyes. In the small bedroom, young Rebecca was awake, sitting vigilant beside Lily's bed. She looked up as Sarah entered, her young face drawn with worry. Her fever's worse, she reported quietly. She was talking in her sleep, calling for her mama. Sarah moved quickly to the bedside, placing a hand on Lily's forehead. The heat radiating from the child's skin had indeed increased, her small face flushed and damp with sweat. We need to cool her down, Sarah said, reaching for the basin of water. Fresh cloths as cold as we can make them. As she worked bathing Lily's face and neck with cool water, she became aware of someone watching from the doorway. Rebecca Reed stood there, her expression a mixture of concern and something else, recognition perhaps. May I help? She asked softly, entering the room. Sarah nodded, moving aside to make room. The fever is rising. We need to bring it down before it causes damage. Rebecca worked with quiet efficiency, her hands gentle but sure, as she helped bathe Lily's small limbs with cool water. She hummed softly as she worked a lullaby that seemed to soothe the restless child. You've done this before, Sarah observed. Many times, Rebecca replied. My father was a doctor. I assisted him often before I married Noah. She glanced at Sarah. You were a nurse during the war, Noah tells me. Yes, Sarah confirmed, surprised that Noah had spoken of her to his newly returned wife. Field hospital in Virginia mostly. They worked in silence for a while, each focused on the task at hand. Young Rebecca watched them both, her eyes moving from Rebecca to Sarah and back again, something unreadable in her expression. You're my uncle's wife, she said suddenly, addressing Rebecca. Aunt Rebecca, he told me you were dead. Rebecca looked up, meeting Rebecca's gaze directly. I'm so sorry, Rebecca, for everything he did to you, to all of you. If I'd known he had you. You couldn't have stopped him, Rebecca said with the terrible wisdom of a child who had seen too much. No one could. Perhaps not, Rebecca acknowledged, but I would have tried, just as I'm trying now, by bringing evidence that will help ensure he never hurts another child. Rebecca considered this, then nodded once, accepting the answer. Will you take us with you, she asked, when you leave with Uncle Noah and the boys? The question hung in the air, fraught with implications. Sarah felt her heart constrict, knowing what the answer should be, what it would be now that Rebecca had returned. These were Noah's family, his responsibility, not hers. That depends on what happens next, Rebecca said carefully. On where we go, what's safest for everyone. She glanced at Sarah, something like understanding in her eyes. But I promise you won't be abandoned, Rebecca. Not again. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Noah stood there, his expression grave. Matthew wants to speak with us, he said. All of us. It's important. In the main room, Matthew was waiting with Caleb and two of his men. The atmosphere was tense, the men's faces grim in the lamplight. What is it? Sarah asked, a sense of foreboding settling over her. One of our scouts just returned, Matthew reported. A large force is headed this way. At least 20 men well armed. They'll be here by dawn. Reed's associates, Rebecca guessed, coming to eliminate witnesses and recover whatever evidence they can. Matthew nodded. We need to move now tonight. Sarah glanced toward the bedroom where Lily lay. The child will die for certain if we move her in her condition, she began, and she'll die for certain if we stay. Matthew cut in, his tone softening slightly at Sarah's expression. I'm sorry, ma'am, but those are the facts. 20 armed men against our 11. Those aren't odds I'd take even without women and children to protect. Noah looked to Rebecca, then to Sarah. He's right, he said reluctantly. We can't stay and fight, not with so much at stake. Sarah knew they were right, knew that staying meant almost certain death for all of them. But the thought of subjecting Lily to a jarring wagon journey in her condition. I'll prepare a wagon with a bed for Lily, Rebecca said, seeming to read her thoughts. Padded as comfortable as possible. Between the two of us, we can monitor her condition during the journey. Sarah looked at her, surprised by the offer of partnership. You'd help. Of course, Rebecca replied simply. She's a child in need, and you've cared for my family when I couldn't. Working together gives her the best chance. The sincerity in her voice made it impossible for Sarah to doubt her motives. Despite the complicated emotions swirling within her, disappointment and loss, a strange sense of displacement, she found herself nodding in agreement. We'll need willow bark tea for the fever blankets. Clean water. She began her nurse's training, taking over as she listed the supplies they would need. I'll help prepare the wagon, Noah offered, and I'll wake the children, get them ready to travel, Abigail added. Everyone moved with purpose, the gravity of the situation lending urgency to their actions. Sarah returned to Lily's bedside where young Rebecca still maintained her vigil. We have to leave, Sarah told her gently. There are men coming, dangerous men. We're going to make Lily as comfortable as possible for the journey. Rebecca nodded, her young face resolute. I'll stay with her. Keep her safe. I know you will, Sarah said, squeezing the girl's shoulder gently. You're very brave, Rebecca. Your parents would be proud of you. The girl's expression flickered at the mention of her parents, a brief softening before the mask of determination returned. Where will we go after? It was the same question she'd asked earlier, and Sarah still had no answer, not one she could give with certainty, especially now that Rebecca had returned, changing everything. Somewhere safe, she said finally. That's all that matters for now. Rebecca seemed to accept this, turning her attention back to Lily as Sarah left to help with the preparations. Outside the homestead was a flurry of controlled activity. Matthew's men were loading wagons, saddling horses, securing supplies. Noah and Rebecca worked together, preparing a wagon for Lily, lining it with blankets, creating a nest that would cushion the child from the worst of the journey's jolts. Sarah watched them for a moment, the easy coordination of two people who had once known each other's movements as well as their own. Despite the years of separation, some bonds remained unbroken. The thought brought a pang of something like grief, though Sarah refused to name it. Whatever might have been growing between her and Noah, whatever tentative connection had formed during their short time together, it belonged to a future that no longer existed. Rebecca's return had changed everything as it should, as was right. Sarah turned away, focusing on gathering her medical supplies, on deciding what could be left behind and what must be taken. The homestead would likely be destroyed by Reed's men, burned like Noah's farm had been. Everything she had built here, everything she had salvaged from her old life would be lost. As she moved through the cabin, one last time gathering essentials, Sarah found herself pausing before the small shelf where she kept her few treasures: Nathaniel's pocket watch, William's carved horse, the twins' first shoes, the embroidered blanket that had wrapped Faith's tiny body. These at least she would take, these fragments of a life that had once been hers. A soft sound at the door made her turn. Noah stood there watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "We're almost ready," he said. "The children are in the wagons. Lily is settled as comfortably as possible." Sarah nodded, tucking the small bundle of mementos into her pack. "I'm ready too." "Sarah," Noah began, then hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us, for me and the boys. There's no need," Sarah replied, keeping her tone light practical. "You would have done the same for me." "It's more than that," Noah insisted, taking a step closer. "You gave us a home when we had none, safety when we were in danger. You risked your life for us repeatedly." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "You brought something back to life in me that I thought had died with Rebecca." Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "Noah, don't, please. Rebecca is back. Your wife, the boy's mother. That's all that matters now." "It's not that simple," Noah said, his voice low and intense. "Yes, Rebecca is back, and I'm grateful beyond words. The boys will have their mother again. But these past weeks with you—" He shook his head, struggling to find the right words. "You became important to us, to me. That doesn't just disappear because circumstances have changed." Sarah looked away, unable to bear the earnestness in his eyes. "It has to," she said simply, "for everyone's sake." Before Noah could respond, Matthew appeared at the door. "It's time," he said. "We need to move while we still have darkness for cover." Noah nodded, though his eyes never left Sarah's face. "We'll continue this conversation later," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a discussion he considered finished. Sarah didn't reply, just shouldered her pack and followed Matthew outside. The wagons were ready, the horses harnessed, everyone mounted or seated for departure. Rebecca was already in the wagon with Lily, and young Rebecca Hannah curled beside them. Oliver and Ethan were in another wagon with Abigail, both boys looking sleepy and confused. Sarah moved to check on Lily one last time before they departed. The child's fever still burned hot, but her breathing seemed a little easier. Rebecca had arranged blankets to cradle her small body, protecting her from the worst of the wagon's movement. "We've done all we can," Rebecca said softly. "Now we pray the journey isn't too difficult for her." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she said, "for your help with her." Rebecca's gaze was steady, compassionate. "It is I who should thank you," she replied, "for caring for my family when I couldn't. Noah told me everything you have done for them." Sarah shook her head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Rebecca said firmly, "not anyone. It takes a special kind of strength to open your home and your heart after suffering the losses you have." At Sarah's surprised look, she added, "Noah told me about your family. I'm so sorry." The simple sincerity in her voice broke through Sarah's carefully maintained composure. Tears she'd held back for hours, for days, perhaps for years, threatened to spill. "We should go," she said, turning away before they could fall. "Dawn will be here soon." She moved to where Willow waited, saddled and ready, stroking the mare's neck in silent greeting. As she mounted, Sarah took one last look at the cabin that had been her refuge for 3 years, the place where she had grieved, where she had survived, where she had, however briefly, found a reason to live again. "Goodbye," she whispered too softly for anyone to hear. The small caravan moved out under cover of darkness. Matthew's men riding point and rear guard, the wagons protected in the middle. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears and hopes for what lay ahead. Sarah rode beside the wagon, carrying Lily close enough to monitor the child's condition, but apart from the intimate family group that now included Rebecca. As the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, she found herself wondering what would come next for the girls, for Noah, and his reunited family, for herself. The desert spread before them, vast and unforgiving, but also full of possibility. Somewhere ahead lay safety, justice, perhaps even peace. Beyond that, Sarah wouldn't allow herself to imagine. For now, it was enough that they were alive, moving forward together through the fading darkness toward whatever the new day might bring. And as the sun crested the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of gold and rose, Sarah felt something unexpected stir within her heart. Not hope precisely, she had lived too long with loss to embrace hope easily, but something like it. A quiet certainty that whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her this far. The gate to her old life had closed, perhaps for good, but ahead, unseen but present, other gates waited to open. Sarah turned her face toward the rising sun, allowing its warmth to touch her skin. The desert, for all its harshness, had taught her one thing: life persisted even in the most unforgiving places. And so would she. Miss Sarah, Ethan's voice called from the nearby wagon, his small face bright with excitement despite the early hour. Will you tell us a story? The one about the brave nurse in the war. Sarah smiled, feeling the last of her tears dry unshed. Of course, she replied, urging Willow closer to the wagon. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who thought she knew exactly how her life would unfold. As she began the familiar tale, embellished now with details that made Ethan laugh and Oliver roll his eyes in mock exasperation, Sarah caught Noah's gaze across the width of the wagon. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of all that had been and all that might yet be. Rebecca, seated beside Noah with an arm around each boy, smiled at Sarah, not the smile of a rival, but of a fellow survivor who understood the price of endurance. Sarah nodded in return, a silent recognition of the strange bond they now shared. The future remained uncertain, the path ahead unclear. But for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Harlow was riding towards something, not away from it. And in that moment, as the desert bloomed around them, in the light of a new day, it was enough.